Big charge or small charge, it's a miniature lightning strike. It's all static electricity in one form or another. Now, we all recognize lightning and have a healthy respect for it. That seemingly innocent spark generated by the dancers is something else. It can lead to bigger and more dangerous things. I'm Colonel Walsh, Ground Safety, USAF Inspection and Safety Center. Now, those little sparks have been causing some of you fuel handlers to have a few accidents, burning yourselves up, not to mention costing the Air Force a bundle in fuel trucks, tanks, and planes. Now, we are interested in preventing those accidents, not having them. We are trying to find ways of reaching you guys. It isn't easy. How about this? Have you ever listened to one of those men who lived to talk about what happened? We know where several are who can't talk. But we managed to find a few who can. Like this one, who was thrown 20 feet through the air from this truck to land in a snowdrift with his britches on fire. And this one, who had a helicopter burst into flames right in his face. And still another, who was blown from the top of this 40-foot tank and had to climb a wire fence with 2 broken elbows to keep from being burned alive. Now, I think you'll be interested in what they have to say.
Did you ever get the feeling that something was going to happen to you? I mean, something like you're going to be in an accident or something like that? You know, a strange feeling that something just isn't right. Well, me and my neighbor there, Nick Leote, and I was talking about that the other day. He told me about the accident he had up in Michigan when he was in the Air Force. He lives here in Louisiana now, and that's a long ways from where it happened. But he remembers every detail. He got that funny feeling when he was standing up there on top of a fuel tank, shivering in the wind one night. When you hear him tell it, well, he'll make you a believer.
I started to lower the temper gauge into the tank. As soon as the gauge hit, I saw a spark ignite. Before I knew it, there was fire everywhere. There was no time for action on my part. Before I knew it, I heard a loud explosion. Next thing I knew, I felt myself falling. I remember hollering out, "Oh God, no." Then I felt myself hit the ground. I bounced about 3 or 4 times before stopping. I remember reading that when you're about to die, your life passes before you. Well, mine did. To this day, I don't know how I did it, but somehow I managed to climb the fence with 2 crushed elbows. Sometime later, I found out it was medically impossible. I guess you can say I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world. Even though I crushed 2 elbows and partially punctured a lung and broke a rib, I managed to survive the fall of 40 feet and escaped the horrible death of being burned alive. The surgeons gave me no hope. They said I would never regain the strength of my arms. Now, after 4 years and 2 operations, I have fair use of both of them. There's one thing I like to say. Don't sell the problem short. Static electricity is always a threat.
So, what have we learned from this accident? The first one, the fuel tank accident, occurred during very bad weather, cold and snowing. And there was no degree of urgency as very few missions were being flown. There was little need to take the temperature of the fuel at that time. The time selected to take the temperature should have been later, a longer time after the filling operation had been completed and weather conditions had improved. The fuel would have had a longer time to relax its electrostatic energy to the walls of the tank and then to bleed off to ground. The gauging hatch was not used because it was frozen shut. It should have been used because the tape and temperature bob would have touched the side of the hatch and bonded itself. The manhole, which is a much larger opening, was used, and the tape and the bob were not bonded to the tank during the lowering operation. Consequently, as the bob approached the fuel surface, it was not of the same electrical potential as the fuel. Because of the difference of potential, the electrostatic energy then equalized by arcing from the bob to the fuel surface and igniting the fuel vapors in the tank. Indeed, the sergeant is very lucky to be alive and to be able to relate his experiences to you. All right, now let's analyze another one. This is Sergeant Robert Gray. He's the man I told you about earlier who was thrown off that truck. And I might add also, one of the lucky ones. Sergeant, what was the story on that explosion?
Well, I'm a sort of a walking, talking, breathing Technicolor survivor. I have a small message for everyone. Alaska is as cold as they say it is. That night I went to Fort Wainwright for a load of JP-4. It had warmed up to 20 below. It was dark and I didn't know where the fill stand was, so I picked up an Army guy to show me the way. I stopped the truck and chocked it, and all three of us climbed on top. I grounded it and took the fill spout down. I put it in the tank, but, well, it didn't quite reach the JP-4 already in the tank by about 2.5 feet. Didn't think about it then, but I was to remember it well later. At that point, we were engaged in what is called a splash fill operation, letting in about 175 gallons per minute. The civilian in charge of the fill stand threw a thief up to us and asked us to get a fuel sample. A thief in this case is, well, a collection bottle. This one was a modified 5-pound CO2 extinguisher. I lowered it on a cotton rope and held it with my foot while the bottle filled. The northern lights were very bright at this time. One of the Army guys began talking about the light and what caused it. We talked considerably, maybe 7 or 8 minutes. The sergeant, the one who came along for the ride, decided it was too cold up there and went back down and got in the truck cab. Another sergeant stayed on to hold the light and talk. A little while later, when we were looking down in the tank, we saw a bright flash. It came right out and got us. In an instant, it was vroom. The landing wasn't bad either. Right in that soft snow about 20 feet off the top of that truck. Never broke a bone. There were only 2 things bad about it. I'm on fire and blind. About that time, the Army type jumped out of the truck, which he said later was lifted right off the ground. He saw us rolling around trying to knock the fire out. He starts throwing snow on us and yelling the whole world is on fire and for us to get out of there. And I'm yelling and can't see and I'm rolling around. I knocked my glasses off. I can see. That flash was so hot it melted the frames and blackened the lenses. We headed over that barbed wire fence and nothing flat. My muckluck got caught in the barbed wire fence and hung there when I jumped. Here I was, running through the snow with one boot off in 20 below weather. I ran back and got the boot, but I never put it on. Don't ask me why. My foot didn't get frostbitten as we took a wide turn through the woods. It wasn't on the ground long enough. We ended up back in the building where we started. The civilian boss had called the fire department, and they came out and put the fire out. But we didn't go out to watch. We'd seen enough for one night. Well, that truck was reduced to a melted pulp. The fuel stand was in pretty sad shape, too.
How about you?
Well, I came out of it in reasonably good shape, with a new respect for static electricity. Here's the real message. Check the length of those downspouts, especially at the other services locations. Make sure they reach the bottom of the tank. Do not sample the tank until filling has been completed, and be sure to allow time for the static charge to relax. Something else, too. Don't lose your gloves in that kind of weather.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Gray, for your personal account of this accident.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your survival. So what happened at Fort Wainwright? You recall the sergeant said he was engaged in a splash filling operation and that the downspout did not reach the bottom of the refueler, nor did it reach the fuel already in the tank. The free fall and splashing action of the fuel during the filling operation created a high static electrical charge between the fuel and the downspout. Because of this difference in potential, a static discharge occurred, igniting the fuel vapors inside the tank. Under no circumstances is it permitted by the Air Force for an operator to take fuel samples for at least 30 minutes or longer in adverse weather after the filling has been completed. This allows the fuel time to relax its electrical energy to a low level through the side of the tank to ground potential. When removing the downspout or thief from the fuel, be extremely cautious. Do it smoothly and slowly. Make certain that standardized Air Force grounding procedures and this new hardware are used. This clip and this plug are electrically interconnected with this nylon-covered cable. We know that you men know what to do, grounding and all that. But sometimes getting you to do it right is something else. Now, it's hard for us to believe that you cannot do the job properly. What, then, is the trouble? Perhaps, as the psychologists might say, you are not properly motivated. Well, I am going to show you something that'll scare the hell out of you. Send you home to get your asbestos pants and wear them. It happened to a sergeant who lived to tell about it. Watch and listen to this.
It was one of those cold, windy days in the mountain country. My helicopter had come back late, maybe 11:30, right at my lunchtime. I was hungry. To make matters worse, I had to fix 2 minor write-ups and refuel it before the flight in the afternoon. To keep things moving, I grounded the bird while I waited for the fuel truck. My attitude wasn't the best, but it improved when I saw him coming. I told him I'd have to get someone to stand fire guard for me and that it might take me some time to find someone since it was lunchtime. We rolled the fuel truck in place and got with it. While I was gone, he pulled out the ground wires and hooked them up. One of the fellows happened to be around and agreed to come out, call the checklist, and stand fire guard. If he'd known what was about to happen, he wouldn't have been so agreeable. When I got back, the fuel type had laid those ground wires and brought out the hose. Everything seemed real normal. I took the nozzle, grounded it like always, and put it in the tank. The fire guard knew the procedure well, so he took his place and started the checklist after he looked around for the IG. We were doing things by the book that day, really careful. We had heard the IG was around someplace. Whether the IG is around or not, we always keep that fire bottle in place. You never know. I've heard it said by some guys that they got a funny feeling just before something happened. Premonition or whatever it is. Well, I didn't get one. I wish I had. I could have gotten an early start out of there. No, I didn't feel a thing. But I heard something deep down in the tank. guess I looked pretty dead, but I was just shocked. Lucky for me, I was wearing that parka. I wasn't too bad off, just scorched around the head and face. They led me out of the hospital that afternoon, but I was still so shook I could hardly find my way to the bar. But I'm more careful these days. I'm a believer.
Now, analyzing the helicopter accident, the sergeant said he heard a crackling noise deep down in the tank. That, fellows, was a warning sound, and that was the time to stop refueling. The electrostatic energy being generated by the flow of the fuel and free-falling to the bottom of the tank was not finding a path to ground, just sitting there, building up energy within itself with no place to go, except to ignite the explosive JP4 mixture. Subsequent investigation showed that the bird was not grounded properly. The crew chief was following the proper procedures with the equipment he had. The grounding equipment was outdated, non-standard. He also chose a location on the helicopter where it was covered with epoxy and with an overcoat of Air Force blue. It was impossible to get a good, solid electrical connection between helicopter fuel truck and ramp static ground. The crew chief was using old alligator clamps, which were, in effect, outlawed on Air Force flight lines. I don't know why the sergeant hadn't gotten the word about the old clamps, although the maintenance people knew there was a time-compliance technical order to modify the aircraft with jack assemblies. The work had not been done prior to the accident. The sergeant was lucky to get away with only minor burns. You have just seen what can and has happened in the past. Department of Defense operations in Southeast Asia have required the development of a new technique in refueling, which is a time and money saver as well as efficient. It is safe, providing nothing goes wrong. And there are several things that can go wrong. Let's take a look at hot refueling. It is called hot refueling because at least one engine is left running. It can happen here. The odds are that there will be one. No one knows where or when. Someday, somewhere, someone is going to forget to ground one of those fighters correctly. Then scratch 2 birds and about 10 men, depending upon how close they might happen to be at the time. You men know what to do. You do it so often and it's so easy that familiarity breeds contempt and carelessness, to name a few of the attitudes you might develop. Have you thought about the odds in this kind of a refueling operation? What are the chances? What are your chances of getting out alive? An engine generates hot gases which are possible ignition sources. As they pass through the tailpipe, they charge the aircraft structure. Add this charge to the one recently acquired in flight, and the bird is really hot. Add that to the proximity of fuel vapors and think about the chances of an explosion and fire. The situation is like a cocked pistol. One little blooper. Okay, so we've scared you a little, or made you think, or laugh. Hopefully you have responded. All right, we'll level with you. There are things we can't explain, nor can we always predict what will happen. We do know that weather plays an important part. Like Alaska, when the temperature is down and the humidity is low. The worst months of the year for this kind of an accident are October, November, December, January, February, and March. The colder and drier the atmosphere is, the more likely it is to happen. We have to say that personnel error plays an important part. Why was the decision made to send a man on top of a fuel tank at that time? Why didn't the sergeant in Alaska know the downspouts should have been longer? Why were old alligator clamps still being used? In the final analysis, we must say that supervision was not up to par. That, coupled with the lack in communication, caused these men to take unnecessary chances with their lives. Don't take chances. One little blooper, and you will find yourself in the middle of one of those great balls of fire.
All the fire.